while we're having these discussions. So without further ado, do I have, let's move on. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's move on to Lucas. Is Lucas with us tonight?
Yep, I'm here.
Hey, Lucas. How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. So what's going on in your world?
Yeah, so things have been pretty consistent in terms of how classes are going. But in some classes, though, teachers have started to use rubrics to assess students' work. And I'll actually talk a little bit about that right now. So the rubric is on a scale from 0 to 4, and the rating that students receive kind of depends on what each teacher associates each score with based on their class. So like, for example, the rubric for a math class is going to be slightly different from the rubric for a foreign language class. But generally, a rating of 4 entails that the student thoroughly engaged with the assignment, they responded to feedback in a timely manner, and they produced quality work. A rating of 3 is kind of like the average score. So the student completed the assignment, they engaged as expected with the assignment, and they appropriately responded to most feedback. Moving forward, a rating of 2, the student completed at least 50% of the work, they showed somewhat of an understanding of the assignment, and they responded to some of the teacher's feedback. A rating of 1 means that the student produced less than 50% of the expected work. They showed little engagement with the assignment, and they responded very little or not at all to the teacher's feedback. And finally, if a student receives a 0, they simply did not complete the assignment. And so just to clarify, quarter 4 for students is still credit-based, as many of you probably know already. So the only purpose of the rubric is to just, like I said before, assess students' work. So for the parents, if you're checking your child's ASPEN, just know that the number you see simply reflects the rubric. It's not actually a grade that they're going to receive for quarter 4. And so yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say as far as the rubric goes.
How are you feeling about that? How are you feeling about the rubric? Do you think it's pretty fair? How are your friends responding to it?
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair. Not all classes are utilizing the rubric. As of right now, for me at least, only 2 of my classes are using the rubric.
Okay. How are you feeling overall? Weather's a little nicer.
Yeah.
That helps the psyche, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Have you and your friends been able to connect in ways other than online? I know, one of my kids is doing car circles. Who knew that was
not exactly. I'm not really allowed to leave the house, so.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, we appreciate your time in coming to brief us on everything. And it looks like your hospital effort was pretty successful.
It was, yeah.
That must have felt good.
Yeah, it was really fun, honestly. Yeah. I enjoyed it a lot.
Good for you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for Lucas? Any comments?
I just had a question for either Pam or Patricia. If is the rubric something that is, standard that all teachers should be using it, or is it just at their discretion?
I believe it's at their discretion at this point.
So it's being used as a gauge to see who's engaged, who's not. So maybe next year we can see, where we need to focus some attention.
Yes, and again, I'm giving you my best answer. I can happily get in touch with Trish and find more detail on that. She's been managing it. I don't think she is on the call tonight.
Okay. So in the absence of the rubric, what are they using? Just grades or pass-fail?
Credit, no credit.
Typically, every class creates its own contract, so to speak, for grading. So there could be differentiated rubrics, there could be typical traditional grading, there could be descriptors with the grades, there could be narratives. So I don't know that they have moved to one collective, unified, standardized rubric. I would be surprised if that's the case, but I am not up to speed on that at this moment. So I don't really want to go beyond.
Pam, it's Jennifer. I'm on the meeting,
Yep.
but I was texting with Tricia, and she's going to pop on really quick to answer your question.
Okay, I don't know that that's the format we really want to follow.
Okay, I'm
tonight.
I was telling her what a great job Lucas did, and she said, should I
Yep.
pop in? And I said, maybe. So do you want me to let her
So
know?
if she pops on and we can circle back to this later, sure thing.
Okay.
Yeah, she's already on.
Okay, there you go. Sorry.
Yep.
Thank you, Jen. In the meantime, we've had some more people join. Can everyone please, please, please check their mutes? Okay, we've got a few people with some background noise, and that would be appreciated.
Trisha's here and ready to speak to the rubric.
Okay, great. Tricia, tell us what the tell us about the rubric that Lucas described and how we're using it, what we're using it for, who's using it, and maybe why people aren't using it. I see her lit up maybe, but is she muted? All right, maybe we'll circle back to this. Tricia, I'm here. Okay. Tricia, are you on? I know you're on. Can you hear us? Can you speak? I feel like I'm raising the dead, you know? Okay.
Panel, she doesn't appear to be muted, but we also cannot hear her. So I'm not really sure what the disconnect is, but
Okay. Why don't we come back?
sure.
Why don't we talk about this a little bit later? In the meantime, Lucas, thank you very much for giving us your time tonight and coming to speak to us. And I wish you continued success in the rubric. And also, hopefully, we get through this quickly and you can get out of your house and see your friends.
Yeah, hopefully. All right.
And not just us. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Okay, everyone. Moving on. Consent agenda. Do I have a motion to accept the warrants and the minutes of 5/5?
So
Anyone?
moved.
Annie, do I have a second?
Second.
I think that's
Caroline.
Caroline seconds. Is there any discussion on this? It's pretty straightforward. Nope. Okay. All in favor? Quick roll call. Eric?
Aye.
Annie, you already did it. Rachel, I'm not sure if she's on yet. Rachel, are you on?
I'm on. Yes, aye.
Okay. Ken is going to be a little late if he hasn't hopped on. Caroline seconded. And Sarah?
Aye.
Okay. All in favor? Sorry. All. I don't think we have any oppositions and no abstentions. So motion carries. All right. Thank you guys very much. Moving on to the subcommittee reports. Elementary facilities, the memorial project. Caroline, Annie, do you guys want to report out on that?
Sure. Am I muted? Oh.
You're not.
Okay, so we had a meeting last week. Pam and Avi are going to have to help me. We had a meeting last week, I think, and all was well. WT Rich was getting back, was developing a recovery plan, but didn't foresee any issues with delivering the building in August, which is good. There is a change order request that WT Rich submitted that Doran Whittier is reviewing, and it has to do with COVID-related expenses. And we have a subcommittee that's just dealing with COVID issues, and we had a meeting yesterday, and I think that there were some questions that arose that the folks on the call felt that WT Rich and Doran Whittier have to get more feedback on. So that is my that's where we are with this, but otherwise we're in good shape. Nothing that is raising any concerns at this point. I think we're back on schedule and within budget. Is that, Pam and Avi, is that a fair reflection of the call, and Caroline as well. I mean, I think that's kind of where we were yesterday.
Yep, I would agree.
Excellent. That's tremendous news given this environment. So,
Yeah.
thank you. Finance Committee, I'm going to move the Finance Committee report to the end of the subcommittee reports, if that's okay, which will probably be momentarily anyway. On Policy Subcommittee, Eric and Rachel, do you have any updates?
Shannon, I'm having trouble. People are joining and they're not muting. So if everybody can please mute, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. So when you join, can you please check on your phone? I think the computer people on laptops are muted, but we have a bunch of cell phones. Case in point. So can everybody please make sure they look at their cell phone and mute? Okay. All right. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Bingo. Thank you. Okay. So again, Eric, Rachel, anything on policy?
We have no report. We have no report because we haven't met.
Okay. Fair enough. Negotiation team, Sarah, Ken?
Sorry, we also haven't met since last meeting.
Okay, I didn't think so. All right, thank you guys. Moving on, Finance Committee, we have quite a lot to report. And I will also kind of use this to preface where we're going with the budget decisions, or not decisions, but the budget discussions. So firstly, as I said at the top, we are dealing with an environment where we basically have no information. We're making our best guesses as to what our state aid could possibly be or not be. We're also trying to make a best guess as to what operations would look like next year and what those attendant costs would be or savings. We don't know. So at this point, our primary focus and our first priority is delivering a program, and delivering a program to the best of our ability within this environment of not a lot of information. We've been working very closely, as I said, with the towns on an almost weekly basis since the shutdown. And that has been very helpful because there's been a lot of information back and forth with regard to how everybody is handling this. So I would say, as we're going to move forward in this discussion, I think we are trying to figure out the best way to navigate this situation, keeping in mind the priority of the program, but also keeping in mind our cooperation with the towns, and also, you know, what they're going through and how they're trying to address the situations with their taxpayers. So that having been said, we had a discussion with regard to the Eagles Nest Essex Playground, and the decision was made to put a hold on that in the meantime for about 6 to 9 months. And I'll give you a little bit of context on that. And some of these data points that we're working with, we could be facing, you know, tremendous budget shortfalls, or, you know, somewhat not palatable, because it's not palatable, but, you know, some shortfalls that we could possibly work with. But again, we don't know enough. Manchester is looking at a 0% tax increase for their taxpayers. Essex is looking at 5% potential reductions, which could mean $1 million impact to Manchester. And that does not include the possibility of, if we don't have a budget that passes or there is no town meeting, we have to go into a 1/12 budget scenario, which is then dictated by the state. So we have a couple of situations that could play out that could be pretty onerous. So with that in mind, we are trying to look at a budget that would support the program. Our best guess is that we would only get that our state aid would be cut about 10%, and that's $360,000, and that is a big hit to our budget. So we're thinking about possibly trying to absorb that while also putting together a budget that would serve the students. So in that mind, given the fact that there is so much uncertainty, we felt that it was prudent to put a hold on the playground project because we don't know what our costs are going to look like. And in this environment of not, as I keep saying, not knowing anything, we felt it's best to just focus all of our efforts on the program. We are going to be using some cuts and some reserves in order to backstop some of these losses, potential losses. So again, in the environment of not knowing anything, we felt it more prudent to just wait and see. Hopefully we will have more information in the summer when we get a little bit more information on our state funding. Maybe as we get closer to the end of the summer, when we get an idea of what the state wants to do going forward with regard to the program, we will be able to hopefully look at this again and have these discussions on the playground and think about where we are going forward. So absolutely a very disappointing situation, and we are still committed to the playground. We are still committed to doing this, but at this point, I think we need to focus on what our first priority is, and that is delivering an education to students. So, you know, I'm not going to go into all of the details, but I think it is, I think this is the decision that we have made going forward. And yes, we will entertain some public comment at the end on this, but this also frames the budget discussion too, because it's one and the same. So having said that, is there anything anyone wants to add on this? And I do, before we move ahead, I do want to wholeheartedly thank the Playground Committee, because they have done a tremendous job, and they have come up with a fabulous and wonderful design that we are all entirely behind. The timing is just, at this point, we need to remain focused on our first priority, and that is education. So having said that, does the school committee have any questions, or does anybody want to comment? School committee?
Shannon, this is Ken Warnock. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Ken.
Yeah. One question: had we voted to fund $300,000 for the structure and a total of $350,000 for the project? Because I'm wondering if we need to kind of unvote or vote to put that on hold.
I believe that we voted. No, I don't think we have to vote to put it on hold. We voted $300,000 for the project with a $350 not to exceed.
I don't remember the 350 not to exceed. I thought we had voted 300, and my understanding is that vote stands. We're just not executing on it. So that vote stands, but I don't remember the 350. Is Gail on the line or not?
Maybe that was just a range that I'm remembering.
It was a planning budget, I think, was the context of the discussion.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so what we had voted at the time was a budget range of 300 to 350. The design goal was 300, which is what the working group hit, with the VE option to discussed to bring it from 300 design to 250. As we know, that VE option, with value engineering option, was not accepted. And the difference between the 300 and the 350, we were hoping we could use for the site costs that we're going to need to expend to get the site ready, because all playground projects have specifications of what is required when someone gets on. So we're going to need to do some of that work as well. And so that's work that would be handled by the under Jason Waldron's oversight. So that's how the different sets of numbers work out, to my recollection. Hope that helps.
Thanks,
So
thanks, Avi.
Thank you, Avi. I think the answer is that no, we do not have to vote to delay it. But the difference is that we didn't actually stroke the check, so to speak.
Okay. So I guess I was going to say that's fine. I just want to make sure we had the right mechanism there. And again, we've had a lot of discussion. There's been a lot, and Shannon, like you said, there's been a lot of good work put into it. That my hope is it will come to fruition. And one of the things, I know there has been a bunch of emotion both ways just as the school committee representative on that committee, I want to just kind of share my point of view, which is that I think it's right. I agree with putting it on hold as part of an overall view to like delaying capital expenditures so that way we can respond to the situation. And I guess I'm looking like the discussion that we had last time, I think it was Pam was describing. I'd also remind everyone that we're putting, this is the first kind of start of, I think, a pretty tough budget discussion where there are other elements of operational or capital budget, possibly up to and including the memorial school, that we're just not getting into all the details now. Like you said, it's running, but that's spending that goes over the next couple of years, that as time permits and as we understand what the situation looks like, we may be carrying out, hey, where do we get savings from in our operational and capital budgets elsewhere? So this, I guess I just am saying, this is, I think, the first one of many things to be discussed around how do we manage fiscally. And so if people can just consider it in that context, and let's see where we get to tonight. But
yep, thank you for those comments. Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I think he is where we get tonight. Does anyone else have anything, school committee, that they'd like to say? Or any questions?
I know that I was vehemently opposed to this in our last meeting and probably was obnoxious about it, but you know.
Annie, I would say passionate, not obnoxious.
Okay, thank you, Caroline.
You're welcome.
You're being very compassionate to me. The thing that hit home for me was we've had hours of discussions about the budget and kind of where we're going with this thing, and not knowing really kind of where the two towns were. We knew where Manchester was. We had no kind of understanding of where Essex was. We're making some difficult decisions in both towns, and the priority has to be on, and our focus has to be on delivering education and making sure that we can pay for it. And we're going to be making some very difficult decisions, and I hate this stuff because it's not just about this year. It has an impact on the coming years as well. So that's why we are where we are. I fully expect that we're going to be fighting about this budget for the summer, because I think we'll make a decision tonight, but we have to be agile and we have to be able to kind of move quickly based on the information that we're getting. So our focus has to be on this, and we have to put off this decision until the fall, until we have more certainty as to where we go with this, the budget. And I'll just shut up about that because it's a long discussion and there are a lot of different scenarios that we have to explore and talk about. And so that's where I am with this thing.
Thank you, Annie. And we all appreciate your candor and your cooperation and listening, and all of that. Anyway, I'm at a loss for words tonight. I can't seem to come up with the words. But one thing I did want to mention, in follow up to Annie's comments, both towns did urge us to think about delaying this, Essex included, especially given the place that I think Essex is going to be in. There at the very early stages, I think, of sharpening the pencils, and what they're coming up with is going to be very difficult for everybody. So I just threw that out there. So before we close this, any other school committee members? No? Okay, so let's move on. Pam, on your update, school closure operations?
Yeah, my super's update is really super quick, because most of our work this week has been focused on budget prep. So just a few points to note. The end of year celebration planning is going really well. Principals will be reaching out and communicating plans within the next coming weeks to each of their communities. Really good news on the Memorial School building project. The packing and moving of classrooms is underway for a accelerated demolition of 2 of the wings that need to come down for the rest of the building, phase 2 to go up. So everything is moving on schedule. We picked up a little time and a little budget to make up for some of the COVID close down by being able to move this ahead. If you have questions about that, we can answer them later on. Big thank you to the staff who's been coming in and packing up rooms and packing up students' belongings. I know it's maybe fun to get out of the house right now, but it's a heavy lift to come in and pack up years of materials overnight. I think they're working in about 6-hour shifts. So thank you to the staff who's making that happen. Thank you to the custodial staff who's in there helping to facilitate moving everything out of the classrooms and into the gym as the staging area. It's going to be a little bit basically in a holding tank until we're ready to move into the new building. So a big shout out and a big thank you to Carlos and the entire team. Jason's been coordinating and John Willis has been on site making sure this all happens in the timeline that's been set up. So that's a very positive, good news story that is moving along and that we've been able to recover from the setback that we thought we were going to have with the COVID issue.
Pam, can I interrupt you for just 1 second?
Of course you can.
We've got a bunch of people who aren't muted, and it's making you sound like you're underwater, and we're missing part of what you're saying. So can I please urge everyone to take a second, check their phones, check their computers, and please make sure you are muted. There are several people who aren't muted, and it's very difficult to hear the speaker. So I don't want to call you out by name because I can see you, but can you please check your phone and your computer? That would be much appreciated. Okay, sorry about that. Go ahead, Pam.
Not a problem. It could be my connection up here in Newburyport. So let me know if it continues and I can try to go to a different device or a different audio setup. So good news, memorial project, packing, demo, all on schedule. Pickup of student personal items. We are well aware that we left school on March 12th, but rather suddenly, in that kids still have items in their classrooms and in their lockers. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be organizing clean out and bagging and tagging for a pickup session at the beginning of June. Right now, our hope is the first week of June if everything moves on schedule, and principals will be directing communications out to parents explaining the when and the how of pickup. In general, it sounds like it's going to be a car roll up pickup. Either we're going to put it in the back of your trunk or we'll be able to stage different stations on the property. So more details to come on that, but we are aware of it and we're working to get that done the first week of June. And then just a very quick update, phase 3 seems to be going very well. We've started to turn our attention to planning for fall of 20. You'll hear a little bit about that actually within our budget conversation. What's a little frustrating is we're not anticipating any guidance from the state until mid to late June. My understanding is the guidance is going to cover everything from how to best schedule the building if we have to do a staggered start or an alternating day or week type of schedule. And what I think we're all really hoping for, superintendents and principals alike, is very clear guidance on any DPH related regulations or guidelines that we're going to need to implement for safe distancing and safe operation. We've all been participating in a lot of workshops and seminars. I happened to be able to participate in one last week, which was a collection of heads of international schools who've reopened in countries like Germany, South Korea, and I think someone from China may have been on the line. The Netherlands was also represented, and they were just talking about things that worked well, things that they didn't think about, and it seems like it's going to be a heavy lift to do a hybrid model. I don't have a lot more than initial thinking on that, but we are going to spend the next month trying to do some brainstorming and some pre-planning, but not get ahead of the guidance. I don't think I mentioned this. They said 85% will be dictated guidance, about 15 to 20% will be local decision. So the caution is don't overplan, but start thinking about options within what we're learning about best practices or what the early jury says on what best practices are for social distancing and hybrid modeling. We're not going to know, I'm sure parents, I would like to know sooner, but I'm sure families are dying to know what the fall is going to look like. Will we still be in a full remote learning model? Will we in traditional, will we get the miracle we're all waiting for and, be able to just go back to school like we always have? That's, I guess, on the table, and we're hopeful that could happen. Or will we be someplace in the middle between remote learning and traditional learning where we're on some new type of schedule, whether it be rotating or long periods of what they're calling rolling outages. I think there's some anticipation that we could start very traditionally, but then have to close down. So if you see what's coming out from the colleges this week, they're planning to go back for 2 months of the fall session, but then transition to online for Thanksgiving and beyond in anticipation of another potential outbreak or spike, rather. So these are some of the things that we're brainstorming about, thinking about, and planning for, and we will be sharing what we know as we know it. And that's it for me, other than the long budget discussion that's ahead of us. So any questions on the general updates?
Pam, did you mention school choice?
That's part of our budget discussion.
Okay.
So I have it for that.
Okay, perfect. All right.
I mean, we
does anyone have any questions for Pam or any comments? I think Annie had a comment or question. Could the district make a local decision on how to deliver? I think that's the 85%, 15% comment that you made a little while ago.
I don't know. My guess is will be, are you saying, will it be like a snow day where we get to make the call locally, whether we stay on remote or go into the building? Is that the basic question? At this point, I don't know if that will be a local decision. And I think that gets into the equity issue in terms of the way the discussion seems to be shaping up statewide. And this is just my interpretation of conversations that I've had, is the biggest concern about restarting school is remote does not seem to be optimal for learning in general. It works really well for some kids. It doesn't really work well for others. It puts a lot of stresses on the household. Whether or not kids are successful often depends on the family's ability to support. It seems to work better when our older students, our younger students. It's somewhat limited in how much can be communicated through Zoom sessions, what the attention span is, the impacts of screen time. And then in the broader context, the equity issue in terms of kids that need to be at school the most are the kids of parents who may be hourly workers. I think what our situation is very different from what may be happening in Lynn. So there's a real push to reopen schools to support the reopening of the economy. And we seem to be the linchpin holding it all together. People are anxious to get kids back in school to provide the necessary day-to-day care in a structured environment so parents can get back to work full time. So I think the state's wrestling with that. And I don't know if they're going to allow us to make the call on the ground. It's really, when you start to think it through, it seems like every question or every potential answer leads to 7 more questions. I would say we might be moving in regional buckets. They may open Western Mass before Eastern Mass. I think everything's on the table and no one has a clear sense of where this is going to be a couple of months from now.
Again,
so not a helpful answer to your question.
Well, again, back to the theme of we don't know. That's tonight's theme, I think. We don't know. All right. So let's move on. Thank you very much, Pam. Again,
you're welcome.
We're making educated or somewhat educated guesses to the best of our ability and to the best of our knowledge, which education is one thing, knowledge is another. So moving on, let's talk about the budget. I have already, given you a little bit of context on where we are. I think I will turn it over to you and Avi, so I don't babble on.
Well, I think a lot of it is a discussion about where we want to go or what our potential options are. Does anyone need a refresher of where we are in the process? Is that helpful to do, or is it just redundant because that's where we spent our time last week?
I think I've spoken.
Can you do a quick recap? I mean, just like for people who are listening who might just like to know a quick recap, or is that what's up on the screen now?
That's what's up on the screen, and I will try. Let me fly through it and try to hit a couple of highlights. Avi, if I missed something of importance, please just jump in and speak over me. So the situation we're in, the problem we are trying to solve to frame our whole discussion is we have passed an FY21 budget. All of our work was done in the typical timeline, starting in December, finishing in February. And we landed at that point on a level services budget. What we're doing now is trying to revise the FY21 budget in accordance with a lot of what Shannon laid out when she was talking about the work we've been doing around timelining of the playground. We were kind of marching along thinking we knew exactly what next year was going to bring, and then COVID hit. And with COVID, everyone knows the economy is in disarray, and that's another unknown. Will it recover quickly? Will the recession continue? Will the recession move to a depression? So there are all kinds of projections and all kinds of theorizing about where we're going financially. Not a lot of it points upward. A lot of it points toward a sustained multi-year shortfall for schools and municipalities. So what we're trying to do with the FY21 budget at this point is revise what we establish as our level services budget to account for what we anticipate may be some shortfalls. I think the problem is we don't know what those shortfalls are going to be. We start with our level services budget using $250,000 of reserves. That's what we needed to make the budget balance. And there was a commitment going into our level services budget before we knew of the financial downturn that we did not want to cut program at this point. Staffing and program were held to this year's levels, and we agreed to use $250,000 of reserves to balance the budget. We discussed at great length during our traditional budget season that some of the pressures on the budget this year were healthcare and out-of-district placements. And some of the theory behind the $250 in reserves was to use them as a backstop for potential out-of-district placements that hadn't yet materialized, but were projected to be strong possibilities for the coming year. So all that being said, we come into the end of the year with a level services budget that now needs to be adjusted for anticipated shortfalls. So I think knowing what the projections are helpful to understanding the conversation we're going to have about how we might reduce the budget. So we had a request in early from Manchester to reduce the school budget by $150,000, and that would have resulted in a $235,000 reduction overall when we factor through the assessment. So just put a pin in that and keep that in mind as when we go and talk about the different budget scenarios that we may be looking at. All our work has been done to try and account for what happens if the projected state revenue shortfalls come to bear. So there is a projection that 10 to 16% state revenue could be cut, and you can see the state revenue buckets listed in the chart, listed on the screen in front of you. On a call that was recent to last meeting and hasn't really been updated since then, on a DESE call about budget, 10% was agreed to by the CFO of Department of Education as a reasonable number to use for planning. So at this point, Manchester-Essex Regional is using a 10% reduction to state and potentially federal aid for planning purposes. And we're going to take you through what those numbers mean. Right here, a 10% reduction to state aid would be a loss of $360,000 in revenue. And if we include federal dollars lost with that, we would be losing $420,000 of revenue. This is before we would even discuss potentially meeting the ask from the town of Manchester. So knowing that, we've kind of gone through, and in addition to the state budget being cut for education, or potentially being cut for education, it's not even likely anymore. It's certain we will not have a state budget to close out the school year. The first draft of the budget isn't even anticipated until July 1 or the first week of July. So the state will not have its budget in place, meaning as of July 1, we will not know for certain what our state funding dollars will be. So that's going to be a question mark in our budget. Even if we settle all of our local, even if we pass local budgets and settle what the assessment dollars will be coming in, we still will have question marks in the budget in terms of what we'll be getting for state and federal aid. If for some reason we are unable to have a local budget, and that would occur if we are unable to have town meetings, if we do not have town meetings and there is no state budget, we will move to what is called the 112 budget. The 112 budget means we would be level funded and receive increments on our budget every month until there is a settled budget. And we'll get into a little bit of detail on what that means later. We will get, on the positive side, we will be getting some CARES Act money. And the working projection there is 80% of Title I. That will give us about $50,000 to $52,000. That money can be used between now and September 22nd, now in September of 22. Theoretically, it's for anything related to additional COVID expenses. Oh, both town meetings. Okay. That's a great question, Annie. Thank you. So because we're a region, we need both towns to pass, to hold a town meeting and pass our budget. So we are in a situation where if everything breaks Essex's way and they're able to get a quorum and have an outdoor town meeting and they pass the budget, we're great, and Essex is going first this year. If something happens and Manchester is unable to hold its town meeting, we still wouldn't have a budget. So both towns need to meet and need to pass our budget for us to have the local budget in place to close out the year. And just to close out, so CARES Act, about $52,000, that's supposed to go to mitigate increased COVID costs. And when we talk budget scenarios, I can give you a sampling of what I think our COVID costs may be going forward. And then we are anticipating some operational savings from FY20. Most years we have some level of savings, and those dollars become our E&D dollars or reserve dollars. So we will be talking about how we anticipate using those dollars to balance our budgets going forward. So are there any questions on kind of what we're facing? Or any details about what we're facing? Yep.
From school committee.
I had a question. It's kind of a blended question based on the warrant and kind of the tuitions that we're trying to prepay. Yep. And I wonder, you know, I'm just seeing some reports of schools that will not actually be in existence next year because of some things, but how are we assured that anything that we try to prepay this year to kind of use up those savings that we might have, right? Or try to use our budget to its most, use the dollars we've already got in hand. How do we, is there any insurance, you know, like, do we get a credit, or is there a certainty in those expenditures that we've already made this year so that we don't have to spend them again? Does that make sense, Avi?
Yeah, yes, it makes sense. And I mean, if I understood your question, I think I heard you say something about maybe a bankruptcy risk that a vendor might have, where he would pay somebody and then they would go under.
It was more about tuitions. It was more about tuitions being paid out that we're doing some of the prepaying maybe, or I'm just wondering about this, you know, all of the schools that we may have outplacements or anything like that, if there's any
Yeah, so I
issues
can tell
with that.
you that we have done prepayments before, and it's a pretty stable process. It's extremely common. It is part of Mass General Law as a practice, knowing that the numbers can change from year to year. And so we've never had an issue like that, and it's not something I'm concerned about, but we do, in fact, get credits on statements in the coming year, so that all that money is tracked very carefully and recorded. And I don't have any concerns about paying that money out and not getting the services. And I can also say that all those programs that we're partnering with now, they are in fact delivering services, much like our district is delivering services. So, you know, we have confidence in that.
And is there any risk involved in, you know, if we're looking at there's possible costs to a remote fall, right? And we're trying to quantify what those costs could possibly be. Would we ever get a bill from an outplacement or a tuition out because they incur additional costs that they hadn't accounted for? So what's the risk there?
Yep. So the private school programs, which tend to be the more expensive programs, they have rates that are set by the State Department of called the OSD, Operational Services Department. It's a procurement branch of the state government, and those rates are set up front. There's a whole application process where the providers have to submit what their cost structure is, and they only get certain costs approved, and they only get limited capped increases from year to year. And that's a way that every district gets charged the same rate, so much so that when you submit your costs, for example, to Circuit Breaker, they know based on whatever program you have what the daily rate is. So I don't see any risk there. The other programs are public school programs and collaborative programs. And generally, because we're all in the same type of economic boat together, people understand that you don't change things mid-budget year. So I'd say we have very good confidence level about the rates. It's really about the placement, and that's kind of always you know, we do our best to estimate the students and the costs.
I'd only offer that the concern is, and the advocacy from State Superintendents Association is that the private school lobby is met with as much enthusiasm, is checked by the town's ability to pay, because I think there is some concern about escalating tuitions. So not a direct billing for a new cost or a new accommodation that has to be made to their facility for COVID, but more of a desire to max out their potential tuition increases when towns are struggling to make ends meet. So I think there's an ongoing conversation about making sure everybody has an equal seat at the table. That's the best way to put it. I mean, they're super important placements, and they do wonderful things for kids. And typically when kids are in those programs, it's because there's an absolute need for them to be. So I think the state is trying to balance ensuring that those specialty programs remain available to students. And that was some of the thinking around how to manage contracts and out-of-district tuitions during the closure. And everyone just wants to make sure that there's equal attention to all of the stakeholders going forward.
You good, Annie? Yeah, I can only see the top of your forehead, by the way. I want to see your lovely face. All right. Anybody else have any questions at this point before we look at our options?
So these were the options we discussed last week, and this was our very early thinking, kind of conceptual about how we would make reductions. And typically, we make reductions at some level every year and create efficiencies. So we have a framework for decision making, and it's always preserve classroom, preserve class size, preserve program and an FTE and try to create efficiencies through things that are either time to be phased out or no longer are providing the service that we need them to, or something that we just never really attended to that could create an opportunity for merging or doing something new. So we look for efficiencies and creative ways to create resources in the budget to maintain the core program. So again, I would just say we went into this year's budget saying we were really running low on areas to cut, areas to economize, creative new efficiencies, and that's why we landed with a budget that used $250,000 to maintain our staff and our program. So going forward, if you think about the 10% reduction in state, the 10% reduction in federal, the request for supporting the town budget goals, and then a potential for a 1/12 budget, you get the 4 columns that appear to you in the document that's up on the screen right now. So going from 360 to $1 million, you have the state aid, state and federal aid, the state federal aid and reduction for towns, and then the 1 million mark is the 1/12 budget should we exit the year without having a local budget in place. So what we've done is gone through, had some preliminary discussions, and tried to identify how we would either find revenue or create reductions in order to meet these benchmarks. So if we start with column 1 for 360,000, we're looking at basic operation reductions. The first thing we can do is revise our healthcare estimates. The team did a really good job negotiating, and we did very well. Avi can quote the percentage increase it ended up being, but we think we'll have 120,000 in savings there. We are going to take a look at eliminating the late bus, especially if we are not in session and having extracurricular activities. There really isn't a need for it, so that's savings that we can take. And we would look at banking all of our retirement savings. Our retirement savings in this row accounts for savings that would be had from people retiring and being replaced by a newer person who is less expensive. So if we use round numbers, a retirement at $100,000 would be replaced perhaps at around $65,000. So we've taken some savings there. Also in retirement savings, we have the retirement of TA, who we would just move not to replace. So we would take an attrition savings there. And there are some other incremental retirement savings from other people who are moving in a projected retirement over the summer. So we believe those measures combined with $85,000 in reserves would allow us to hit our first benchmark. And then we just move across we move across the spreadsheet to each of the different benchmarks, adding from each column. So we add nothing in program or staffing reductions to address the 420, but we do adjust and at that point defer or fund yearly facility small cap investments from stabilization. So that's where we use our stabilization dollars for. That allows us to use 85,000 in reserves and close the gap there. When we get into the two right-hand columns is where we start to see impacts to program. The upside of it is that the impacts to program come primarily through reorganization of staff by putting on a hiring freeze. I think that's the easiest way to summarize it. Program reductions and staffing reductions both require a hiring freeze and not replacing anyone who leaves, but reorganizing people within the faculty and the staff to take on new positions to fill gaps that have been left behind. So in the $655,000 column, we would be looking at, we haven't fine-tuned exactly what the changes would be or who would be impacted, so I'm going to speak in generalities here, but an example of the program reduction in the $655,000 benchmark column would be deferring the replacement of a library media specialist. So we were going to this year in our budget put in place and replace the middle high school library media specialist. So if we have to close the $655,000 gap, we would defer that until we have the resources available again to do so. We may look at something similar to the consolidation of art between the two elementary schools and look at music, for example, as an area to do the same. So we're going to work through and prioritize those program reductions for our next iteration of the budget. When you get into the $1 million column, it starts to impact classroom. So again, we have staffing reductions and we have retirements in both the teaching faculty and the support staff through TAs that we would simply not replace. And by not replacing them, we'd have to go and work with our entire staff and faculty to find people who could take on the role of classroom teacher or move into a TA role if the TA is a necessity for an IEP. So it causes a lot of shuffling among staff, and we have to work through the who and the what of that. But overall, to get to $1 million, we believe that only 2 people may be impacted, and we don't know who they may be in the end, but up to 2 people may be impacted by bumping and reorganization. The rest would be achieved through some type of attrition. Now, I've put tallies on the bottom based on what we know at this point to show that attrition means reduction. Because I think over the years, we've taken attrition savings when someone has retired, and they go unnoticed in terms of impact to the program. So this is to just note how many positions we would be losing. So if we go to the $1 million mark, we'd cumulatively be losing 5.5 FTE, 3 TAs, and 2.5 administrative support. And I think we're looking at getting to administrative support by either reducing to part-time some existing positions, depending on what the fall brings in terms of configuration, or again, moving people around from building to building to fill vacancies left by people leaving. So on paper, it's an exercise of numbers, and we can get to that $1 million column. But in terms of impact to the faculty and the staff, it's going to be incredibly disruptive when we get to the $1 million column. And it's going to really cause people to have to think differently about their work, how they're doing business, what they're doing, and really think outside the box. So we have a little bit more work to do before we're going to show you all of the details underneath, but hopefully for our next meeting, we will be there and be able to outline exactly what it all looks like when we reorganize under each of the scenarios. So if there are questions on that, before we do questions, I want to show you where we're at and where we need to be. So we need to go and put more detail to the $1 million reduction and the program reductions for the $655,000 benchmark. In addition to that, we need to build 2 additional budgets. One that would address all of benchmarks in a blended operations model, and one that will address the benchmarks in a remote operations model. So I talked very briefly in the superintendent's notes that we don't know what the structure of the school year is going to look like right now, and we may not know until midsummer if we're lucky. And where we are in midsummer may not be where we land in August. So knowing that there's a lot of uncertainty, we need to plan for multiple scenarios. So we've made all of our reductions assuming a traditional model of education. So we know how to do this work if we're coming to school in our regular schedule, kids are in the buildings all day, every day. We know where we can absorb unwanted reductions, but we would know how to manage them. We would know how to backfill positions. We would know how to continue to provide supports to kids. What we have to take a little bit of a deep dive on is what does it look like in a blended model, and what does it look like in remote operations? And I'm going to take remote operations first because it's probably the simplest. If we were to be in a situation where we open up the fall, very similar to how we're doing business now, we've implemented phase 4. We hope we will have a more robust remote learning or virtual learning model. We will scale that up some more. And we know we're out until November or January. At that point, we're going to be looking at a whole different set of options for us, in some upsetting and some just good common sense. So the good common sense ones are, we're going to review and negotiate contracts for transportation. Maybe we are looking at out of district placement payments at that point in time. We're probably looking at the kitchen contracts. We might be looking at the custodial contracts if the buildings are shuttered. So what are the things that we can look at in terms of renegotiating and finding money in contracted services that are necessarily for keeping the buildings open? I think we also need to look at our personnel levels at that point in time. There was a commitment made this year to ensure that everybody remained on full salary from now until the end of the year, regardless of your role in the school. I think if we know for certain we're going to be on an extended shutdown, we are going to need to review personnel levels and work agreements of all employee groups and see if we have an obligation to make some changes there. That's remote operations. If you look at the blended operations, I think we have cost reduction benchmarks on the page. We also need to prepare for cost increases, because the blended operations in kind of in a financial exercise is the most costly of them all, because we'll have to be doing two things at once. We'll have to be running an on-site operation with all of the people that are necessary to do so, and we'll also have to have some type of robust remote operations, because some of the models they're talking about now are, like I had mentioned up front, either every other day, small groups of kids coming to school. There could be an A week, B week, C week. It could be 1 week on, 1 week off. So it anticipates, if we're going back in a blended, that there's some component of the student's day that would be some component of the student schedule where they would be learning remotely and some where they would be learning inside. So things we need to develop for that budget are, what are our costs for transportation? So examples, social distancing on a bus. And talking with other superintendents, some people are using, I think Pentucket's using 15 as an operating number. If we're going to, maybe we can put 15 students on a bus under the socially distanced model unless they change some of the requirements. So if you are going to put 15, let's say 20 kids on a bus, do you need to double your bus capacity to move students to school? If we have to double our bus capacity, what does that do to our transportation costs? If you're going to socially distance students on a bus, you need enough buses. You also need monitors on those buses, I would assume, to ensure that the kids are following the rules. The bus driver needs to drive, so you'd probably want to put personnel on the bus to facilitate the social distancing. So these are some of the things we're anticipating we may need to do. Not sure if we will. I don't want to cause panic, but we have to think through what some of these, what some of the obligations may be to stagger the reopening of school. Other things we'll be looking at is the level of custodial and maintenance operations we'll need during the day. I think there's going to be a higher level of need for ongoing sanitization of the school. Having, if we do, let's see, we did half capacity at the middle high school, that's still 400 students plus faculty in there per day. There's going to be ongoing need to sanitize bathrooms, hallways, high touch areas, et cetera. So what's the level of staffing we may need to do that? And then what facilities modifications might we need to put in place? Do we need to have outdoor stations to test kids or temperature check kids when they come in? Will that be an obligation placed on us through the guidance? Will we need some type of barrier protections around each of the desks in the classrooms? There's some discussion going on now about you think about like a plexiglass carrel added to the desk to prevent, bodily fluids from being exchanged, or, contain the sneeze in one student's station. And then, just like all of the state governments, there'll be an expectation that we provide protection equipment. So what does it look like in terms of stocking masks and goggles and gloves? And these are some of the things we're hearing that the schools in Europe are doing to reopen. So we need to put that together and see, do our CARES dollars cover that, or are we looking at really escalated costs in some of the areas that we don't typically incur increases from year to year. So all that being said, we've given you 4 options for cutting benchmarks under the traditional model, but we have some obligation to go back and continue to work the budgets under the other scenarios, just so we know what our options are going forward. So that was a lot dumped on you. So why don't we start with questions, and we can unpack this a little bit and then have a discussion about where we may want to land.
I think the key here is we need to maintain our flexibility to be able to address information as it comes out, because it sounds like it's going to come out at our best guess midsummer and then late summer. So we need to be very flexible, and we need to leave ourselves enough flexibility, I think, to do that.
Can I ask one question, Shannon? This is Caroline. So Pam, just to clarify for me, I think I got them all. The 360 column is state aid only. 420 is state and federal. I missed the 655. Is that state, federal, and town?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome.
So I have some questions in the chat, but are the CARES dollars only this year, this fiscal year, or can we anticipate we'll see something again in fiscal year 21? Or is that not something that our federal government has decided yet?
I would put that in the unknown column.
Okay.
Typically, historically, I think we would all be anticipating significant stimulus dollars to make sure we are ready to get the kids back in school as soon as we possibly can. That being said, I think there's a fear, given the current political climate, and that's not to, that it won't happen, and it won't happen in a timely way. And we're going to try to figure this out at the same time that we're trying to trim budgets, because people are, there are financial problems for everybody right now.
So I guess the kind of the situation in which we're looking at decision making is an initial decision now, but with some insight into what further reductions we may need to make given the news that we'll hear progressively through the summer. So that's kind of the situation you've set up here, which is here are kind of the degrees of cuts that we could be looking at based on the inputs we get, over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, Shannon, I know that you had kind of set this up for us to have a discussion tonight and then make a final decision next week if we scheduled a meeting, or what were you anticipating tonight in terms of decision making?
I think ideally it'd be great to have a decision tonight, but it is a lot to it's a lot to chew on. So I'm not averse to potentially scheduling another meeting next week. I mean, I don't know what everyone's calendars look like. I won't make assumptions. But ideally, if we could get some idea of how to and where to direct Pam and Avi tonight, I think that would be an ideal.
And Pam and Avi, if you could just speak to, if we made this reduction, or if we took the column 1, for instance, can you tell us what revenue, where does this have an impact on the town's budgets, or do you know what I mean? So what does that do to our budget and our revenue inputs?
Do you mean assessments?
Yeah, I mean, or are we not touching assessment right now, or is this just a cut? I just wonder if you could speak to that.
So,
Avi, do you want to speak to the mechanism of how if we reduce the revenue and add in a little bit more of the reserves, how it plays and how it plays out?
Yeah, sure. So if you look at this chart, for example, in column 1, there are items that are really fit into multiple parts. So the top category, operating reductions, those are spending reductions that would lower our spending. But it's in an understanding that the 360 at the very top line would be a revenue reduction. So you would reduce that revenue, you would decrease the spending, and you can see the spending reduction is just $273,000, while you have a revenue reduction of $360,000. So you would need some additional revenue to make up for that 363, so you don't have to cut more than the 273. Again, just looking at column 1. So column 1 would include a spending reduction of 273, a revenue reduction for state aid of 360, but a revenue increase of reserves of 85. So that's how you get the 85 plus the 273 makes you whole for the 360. And the concept there, to get back to the original question, is that you would be changing revenue down, state aid, revenue up, reserves, spending down, but no change to assessments. And it's really, column 2 kind of works the same way with a bigger number of a cut. But it's not really till you get to column 3 where we talked about the difference between column 2 and column 3 being that we're starting to factor in assessments as well. So you would be reducing the spending so that you could, in addition to the revenue reductions in column 1 and 2 from state and federal, you'd also have an additional $235,000 revenue reduction for assessments. So columns 1 and 2, no change to assessments.
and given the discussions that we've had in the collaboration group where we've met basically weekly, if I'm not mistaken, kind of seems like Groundhog Day. The budgets that the towns will support, and that is the key, I think, because if we get to a town meeting, we want a budget that will be supported. And I think Manchester's feeling pretty confident that we will get to a town meeting, doing it outside, 6 feet apart, and there's a rain date set as well. So I think what's really important is to focus on a budget that would be supported by the towns, because we would rather have that option than go to the 1/12 option. So I think we have some control over our destiny if we have a budget that has been supported and passed by the towns than if we don't. It's a lot worse, as you can see by the far right column, which could also move even further right if we start to factor in some of those other numbers. So I think those first 2 columns are what I think we should start thinking about, with the understanding that we may need to be flexible to move to the right if circumstances dictate. But I think that's where we want to focus our attention tonight. Is that fair?
Could I ask a quick question? This is Caroline again. So Shannon and Annie and Avi and Pam, do we have, we know what Manchester has asked of us and where they stand. When, we've kind of touched on a little bit, but when will we know what Essex, like if we come to a decision tonight or next week, can Essex then come, like when will we know what Essex wants from us or what they are in the position to be able to support?
Well, we know what
town meeting.
I know that Ruth is on the line, and I don't know if there are any Essex FinCom folks on the line, but if you have any further information for us, we would benefit from hearing from you.
Or do they support what we presented already? I just want to make sure that I'm understanding.
Is Allie on the line? I know you've muted a lot of people.
If somebody can't, we can't hear somebody and they're having trouble, let me know through the chat and I can try to open up their mics.
Ruth is on the line, but I don't know if Ruth, are you on your laptop, or are you a call-in user? Can she unmute herself? I'm texting her. Let me text her.
Okay. Caroline, in the meantime, the discussions that we've had, I think Essex is at the very early stages of trying to figure out what their losses might look like. I think they're going to see a hit to local receipts, and they're factoring in what this possible summer could look like. And the mechanism that they have employed is that they're not going to make any cuts yet, but they're going to give the selectmen the ability to make cuts on the floor of town meeting. So I think we need to be kind of flexible there.
Shannon?
Yeah. Are you?
Oh, it's Rachel. Hi.
Hi.
Was Ruth on the call or not?
Ruth-
Because I have Rob here.
Ruth is on the call and is trying to speak, but she can't. No one can hear her.
Yeah. Rob.
Well, I've got a FinCom member right next to me if we want just a quick
Yeah. Perfect.
gut check.
Yeah. Perfect. Rob, this is Rob
All right.
Fitzsimmons. Rob, can you? Hi. Thank you
Hey
for
guys, how you
Can you
doing?
give us a quick idea of what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just give you some bare bones outlines. I mean, I know that Ruth's on the call and in the finance committee meetings that I've been on, Ruth has joined us as well and has been really great. And I know that there's also a kind of a working committee of both the selectmen and the FinComs and the school boards. So I prefaced all that just by saying is that like there's obviously work being done on the budget. I'm not necessarily privy to that. I can just sort of tell you what's going on, at least with the Essex FinCom, and what's in our heads right now. Obviously, with COVID-19, this is massively unprecedented. We are, like Ginny and Jeff Soulard, who are kind of finance and assessors, they're kind of monitoring the situation, but it sort of boils down to is like, look, we're going to have some sort of fiscal impact. The fact that so many people have been laid off their jobs, so many of their sort of restaurant receipts are down. We can only expect that that's going to result in some grave fiscal news for the town. How grave, we're still trying to figure out. This is occurring, of course, at a time when we're shopping for a 30-year bond to build our new fire station and emergency services building. So in the last couple of FinCom meetings that we've had, the month and a half, is that we've really talked a lot about like trimming the budget and what can we do. One of the things that stares us in the face in the FinCom is that the school budget is the majority of the town's budget. It's like, I think 51%, not a little higher. So, we talk a little bit about, or we have talked a little bit about, like, well, we could, trim this, not do like a, I don't know, like, lighting or cut back this tiny budget and that budget. But the point of this is that, as I said at our last FinCom meeting, the big kahuna is the school budget. And if we need to make cuts, if we need to sort of right size our budget to be in line with the revenues that we expect to get, then we have to look at the school budget. That being said, I mean, we would partner with you guys in sort of figuring out, well, what is the right size and what is how deep are the cuts going to go. I think it would be, but I guess what I would tell you guys is that it would be better to assume that there will be cuts than there will be no cuts at all. I don't think that's, I mean, we expect an impact because of the pandemic situation. And that's basically it.
Thank you, Rob.
Any questions?
The message I think we got from Ben last week was, right on target with what you're saying. Yes, there will be cuts. They just don't know what the magnitude of them is. So yeah, I guess we're just waiting to learn what those numbers are and how that's going to be delivered. And I know we're going to be talking about it in our working group on Friday. So thank you for that.
So I just got a text from Ruth, who's unable to speak because I don't know why. But Essex is staying the course of our commitment to the district for fiscal year 21. We are not looking to have the district make cuts from Essex. We would only ask that if the district sees savings, that they pass it on, and that may change for 22 fiscal or 21. 22, yeah, fiscal year 22. So, so that's where they are right now. But I guess my concern is that when I look at column 4 and say, you know, things hit the fan and we need to make reductions. If you make personnel reductions after June, you can't really make them, right? I mean, can you just speak to that? Because I don't want to be in a position where we've locked in something in June and then, you know, things don't go well into the fall and we're and we can't make changes. So can you just speak to how we would handle this?
So I think we have to have the entire $1 million benchmark game plan laid out and people notified by June 15th of this year.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that works in our favor, and this is a very clinical assessment of it, because I do have some comments on what that benchmark does to our program, to our kids, and to our capacity to deal with things, and we can talk about that a little bit later if you'd like. But I think we can do all of our work by June 15th and let people know clearly what impact that $1 million benchmark would have on them. What I was starting to say is what works in our favor is most of the impact will be, and that's not to say that there isn't any impact to people's jobs in some of these scenarios, but a lot of it will be in moving people around to areas they may not be thinking that they could go to at this point in time, because we achieve the financial savings through attrition. So there's not an urgency necessarily for letting someone know or letting many people know that they don't have a position, but there is some urgency in trying to figure out what the pathway is to filling those vacancies and who in the organization may be eligible to go where to do so. So those are some of the details that we have to work through. I think it's incumbent on us to have it mapped out by June 15th, if possible. What we may not have with certainty, and I think we have to work with our association there, is to talk a little bit about what some of the more large scale things that we may want to consider in continued remote operations in the fall would look like. So we're talking about some of the deadlines that we have and what a timeline might be for decision making on that.
Okay, and I'm sorry to dominate, but I'm going to ask a question about the second column.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the small cap expenditures and the possible savings there, and I'm wondering, you know, can we, you know, we've got a month and a half left of this year. Is there any way that we can take any of the savings that we have from this year and spend that $60K now? So that we get the thing is that that's work that has to happen. It's not like, you know, it's a tangible thing and it has a deliverable. So I'm just wondering, is there any way of taking that reduction, taking the 420 column, because it's essentially the same thing as column 2, and spending that now so that we can take that reduction? Does that make sense?
It does. I probably should have said, and Avi, you should have scolded me for not, is that in addition to as we move every column out to the right becomes more detrimental to the program and what we're providing for students, it also becomes more detrimental to our long-term financial health and creates a bigger hole for us to dig out of in the out years. So prepaying the 60 for capitalization or taking for capital improvements or taking out a stabilization whether it comes from surplus at the end of this year or surplus from the end of this year that we put into the stabilization account, it's more reserve spending.
This isn't more reserve spend. It's at 85 right now. This is just a cut to expenses.
Well, yes, but if you're going to fund small cap work through stabilization is a different reserve account.
Oh.
And the 85,000, the monies that we save in surplus this year that we may save through being closed are the monies that are going to go into E&D and stabilization to fund outlying years.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that's important for folks on the phone to hear is that what happens when we use money out of reserves. So right now we've taken 250, and we had quite a battle to get that in the a few months ago, and then we
started with 100 last year.
Right.
So that's how it exponentially multiplies year over year.
Yeah, and I think people need to understand how that works. So we're taking we could be taking, I haven't voted it yet, 335 from reserves. That's total. That's the 250 plus the 85. And what that does when you got to try to go to the towns the next year. So we've got to, it's like this bad rolling rock that just keeps dragging you down. So I wondered if you could speak to that so that people understand what happens to the budget.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me, I think what we've seen in the past is that once reserves go in, to undo that, you've got to cut something else or have some type of a windfall of revenue. And, we're not in that type of an environment. Typically, when reserves were part of the budget in the early teens of the 2000s, 2010 decade, I guess current decade, early on, that was to, make up for enrollment growth while still keeping our budget within Prop 2.5. And what we saw, as you said perfectly, is that the amount tends to grow year over year in a way that can be hard to slow down because, and really the issue is inevitably cost structures. If you just think about health insurance alone, this year we're doing great with a 3%. We had a major restructuring of our health insurance program and brought a lot of savings. That's not something we can do every year. The average is around a 7 to 8% in the market. That's what medical trend is. So those types of cost drivers in a budget are very difficult to absorb in other ways. So inevitably the reserve number does tend to grow, and so you need to have a multi-year look. I think as we've been saying, our reserve position going into this has been healthy and strong, which is great. It helped us to get a nice favorable rating upgrade when we borrowed money for the Memorial School project, $35 million, which was a savings to taxpayers, which is great. I think less of an issue of running out of them is more of an issue of if you get to a point where you have, say, 335 or on the far right column, 382,000 used, in 2 or 3 years, are you talking about $500,000, $600,000, $100,000 as that number grows, and then it becomes a point where no amount of revenue correction or town adjustment in future years can really absorb that. And so I think it's one of those things where we have to recognize it for what it is. It's a stopgap measure to avoid painful cuts, and what we have is some painful cuts at the top. I think we're trying to balance them out. And, I will say, just to counterbalance that point quickly, we do have reserves for a reason. They are to absorb shocks. This is the type of shock that happens, once every 10 years, every economic cycle, so to speak. So I think it's appropriate to be using them in a limited fashion, but you need to have an end game. And so I think your first question is spot on. We should expect that once they start going in at these levels, that the number will continue to grow, and we really need to know, how we're going to come out of it. At this point, there's so much uncertainty. I don't think we're going to be able to have an end game, but I think it's very important to start talking about it.
So Shannon, can I advocate for something?
Yes, in a minute. I just want to make sure that all the rest of the committee has asked any questions that they would like to ask.
Okay.
Anyone? Bueller? Anyone? Are we all good?
I have a quick question, Shannon.
Yeah, Rachel.
Pam or Avi, can you just speak to the mentor program really quickly for the fourth column for those that may or may not be familiar with it?
Yep. That is a reduction. The mentor program is something that we have to have in place, and it's a program that we are really proud of. When we hire new teachers, particularly beginning teachers, they are assigned a mentor. They need to be assigned a mentor to move to their next level of certification, but we also typically provide mentors to anyone coming new into the system. They go through a series, they come in with a cohort, they go through a series of classes. They meet with their mentor regularly just to make sure they're assimilating and being coached on how to, if they're a new teacher, how to adapt to their new work environment, and if they are a veteran teacher, just how to adapt to the culture that exists in the building. So why it's in the $1 million benchmark column is we can assume that it really wouldn't be much of a loss because we wouldn't really be onboarding any new people. So it's really just a savings, an operational savings from the fact that we have essentially shut down any new hiring by that point.
You good, Rachel?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I think
Great
Jen
question.
had a question too.
Yeah, I guess I'm viewing this. This is great, Pam and Avi. You've worked this out. What I'm guessing is over as time, the next several weeks go on, as we get this, even though you've got it spelled out as 4 different scenarios, and again, 3 different operating modes, potentially bad analogy, but it evolves into almost a menu of what might happen on cuts to revenue and what might be responses based on required revenue, or required makeup for revenue, as well as, geez, this is what the state requirements are, what the requirements of educating our students still are. So
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. This is a really good start, and I appreciate it conceptually. And I guess I know we're talking about decisions, and I suspect as we've talked, they're going to be rolling decisions, but it's good to have them in this format at the start. Thank you.
And we're focusing on the worst case scenarios. I think, let's stay optimistic. There's a scenario where we get a significant stimulus package. They're able to backstop all of the state funding and give us a little bit of additional money to help support the new implementation needs for COVID-19 social distancing, safe schools responses. So we could at that point be talking about if the towns are still feeling the pinch, how do we then move back to a conversation about being, good partners and sharing our positive position. There is potential for things to break our way over the summer. I don't want to take that off the table, but I know talking with colleagues and talking with the principals or talking with their colleagues, the ultimate frustration, you can probably hear it in my voice, is there are so many decision points, but we do not have good information on which to make decisions. So everyone is very much in a holding pattern with a lot to think about, but no clear direction on how to proceed. So I think it's going to be a really, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks ahead because everyone's clamoring for something to come out to help point us in a direction that we need to go. So I will keep you as informed as I am, but there's not a lot out there right now to help us make these decisions. So it's just our best guess at how things will turn out. And I think it was Shannon who said maintaining as much flexibility as possible is probably my best recommendation at this point in time. I am really concerned about the $1 million mark and what it will do to the quality of what we're able to offer kids when kids will need more than they typically do. We'll be in a depleted position where we should be ramping up to help them regain lost time. I think Sarah was a tremendous advocate of that that point in communicating that point last session. this is really a time, my pitch is when communities in the state and the feds should be looking at investing in schools because schools are the gateway to reopening the economy. We shouldn't be making short-sighted decisions to just cut them back at this point because the climbing out of it will be harder and it's the kids who are going to be the casualty of it.
I
You want me
really,
to
I
chip
really
in? I can
appreciate.
say some more. I just to build on what Pam is saying. Yes, I just think our children and our families with children have been some of the hardest constituencies hit by this COVID situation. And I know, families who are trying to work with kids in school and families who are hit hard in of so many different ways, that I just think it behooves us to provide the best possible, strongest school that we possibly can in the fall for all those kids and families coming back.
Thank you, Sarah. You said that really well. I guess I just want to close, Pam. Thank you for the optimism for those relatively new on the call. The school committee is not generally good at doing fiscal optimism, so I really appreciate. We go to the worst case. Yeah, well, that's true. And it's also a valid point. I guess two final things, Pam and Avi. I know there was a big ask in getting all this together. I think this is going to be important to communicate through the towns and through newspapers and things so people are seeing that. And I'm sure that we are going to have in future school committee meetings the focus on, how are we providing for the students? What are the needs that need to be met? Not, okay, how much less can we do, but what are the holes that are appearing that we hadn't planned for filling? So thank you for, someone feels somewhat schizophrenic how we jump around, but it's good. We cover it all, I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. If nobody has anything further to say, I know Caroline wanted to advocate for something. Is everybody all set? Caroline, why don't you go ahead?
I mean, basically all I was going to say is what pretty much everyone else just said. I think the most important thing is we get a budget that is supported by both towns. I think that's really crucial so we don't end up with the 1/12 budget. So, and to afford us the most flexibility and that we don't handicap ourselves. So I really think that we need to show that we are supportive and go with the 360. It sounds like both towns need to know, are kind of chomping at the bit to get an answer from us so that they can move forward and we can kind of all. So I just think the 360 hits all of those buckets. And so that's kind of where I am right now. And if it comes down, I don't want to cut too much because then if we approve a budget, we can't increase it. So if state funding does come, it isn't as detrimental, we can't go back up. So if we get any windfalls, we can, share the love if we can afford it. But I think we should support the 360 at this point, and that's the direction that Pam and Avi should be given.
Okay. Pam and Avi, is this a point at which should we be taking a vote on this, or is it just kind of a straw poll? Do we need a formal vote?
We need to. So I threw up. Avi had provided a spreadsheet about what that scenario would look like in terms of the budget revision.
The 350
for the 360.
Yeah,
and
sorry.
he can talk you through it.
Okay.
And yes, if you would like to be able to close the loop for the towns tonight so they can move forward, you would need to vote the budget revision. And that still allows us to come back and even increase our frequency of meetings to go through some of the details under each of the categories as to what it will start to look like in those out columns if we get there.
Okay.
So I think that is up for consideration. Avi, please jump in and provide more detail if needed.
Well, just briefly on the next steps and operational question of what we do. I think what I heard from the budget collaboration meetings, very much echoing Caroline's comment, is that the towns are trying to prepare for the hope of having a town meeting in June. And I think that would be in our best interest if it can happen, because it can help us to avoid the scenario where we get into column 4, which is a level funded $1 million cut if there is no town meeting. Now, granted, it may not happen. There's all sorts of logistical challenges, but Thankfully, the towns are working very hard on that, and we can, support them however possible. But I think by having a budget to give to them, what I heard from the collaboration meetings, that would allow them to, when that meeting happens, express their support for what we're doing, provided that they have it. It would allow them, if we vote tonight, to deliberate on what we're proposing. Obviously, there's a lot of questions about, can they get behind our spending plan? What does this mean for their assessments? What does this mean for our over multi-year health? And I think from the collaboration discussions, it's pretty clear, and from some of the comments made by town representatives tonight and in prior meetings, that they want to be able to have that chance before town meeting. So this is a quick slide that shows, based on column 1, what you would be looking at. Pam, can you slide up a little bit, because I think we're missing the top rows.
I'm doing my best. I'm a little frozen.
All right.
Oh, let's see.
Well, while you're looking at that, I can briefly describe what you're showing, which is that there are 3 columns, and the first column is the February budget, and the second column is a proposal. It is basically the column 1 scenario proposal and what it would do, and the third column is the change between them. And the idea is that if we vote column 1, here's what would change from February, first column, to the May vote. So the short punchline is that your budget would be going to $26,815,714. So that's where you can see general fund revenue operating in the middle, and that comes from a 10% reduction to state aid, which you can't see, it's above the line, but that's, I can tell you it's there. It comes from, you can see the reserve, the assessments number is exactly the same at 23,464. Based on the types of spending changes we're talking about, there could be a very modest change in the apportionment. You can see a $305 difference. That's just as a reminder, different types of costs, instructional, non-instructional, get apportioned different ways. And we would need to verify this and send this to the towns. But essentially, as we discussed in column 1, there's no change to assessments. You can see right above it, total revenue before assessments is going down $245,000. That's the $360,000 cut, of which we said $273,000 would be revenue reductions. You're seeing $245 so far. I'll show you the other remaining portion in a second. Down below, the spending, this one. So down below, again, let's just hold it here. Okay, go back for a second. Sorry. No, we got to go back. I apologize.
That's the one you want.
All right, so this is perfect. Sorry. So right here, you can see below the general fund revenue, and I don't know if you can see my cursor moving around. Let me know if you cannot. But you can see spending budget adjustments, and the salary line would be going down $133,500. That's the number that Pam talked about related to retirements. The operations expenses would be going down $112,000. That's basically down $120 for health, down $20 for the late bus change, but you have to add back expense because there's a $27,900 removal of state aid in the form of circuit breaker. And circuit breaker in our budget doesn't appear at the top in the revenue section. It's actually an offset to our out-of-district cost. So by having the 10% reduction to state aid, we're going to see $245,000 at the top. That comes in the form of Chapter 70 in transportation, and $27,900 at the bottom, which is going to bump up expenditures because out-of-district has $27,900 less of an offset from circuit breaker. Those two numbers together, the 245 and the 27, is how you get to your 200 and I'm looking here, $273,000 revenue reduction. We said the remainder of the revenue reduction, which was 360, is going to be covered by reserves. So now if you go to the second line that's showing here, you can see E&D funds to support operating budget. That's 250 going up to 335. That's an $85,000 increase. So to summarize, in total, your operating budget is going to go from 27,061 down to 26,815. That's a $245,000 spending cut. You're going to also have an $85,000 reserve increase, and you're going to have a $27,000 offset to circuit breaker, and all of those gets you to your $360,000. So I think what we could do, just as a suggestion to everybody, is do we want to vote the 26,815 budget tonight with no change to assessments, other than potential apportionment change due to the formula? And if so, we have something to go with to the towns, and then that still gives us the opportunity to deliberate further. The other thing I would say briefly is that, as we've been talking about, as we looked at the 4 columns, those are scenarios we don't know how they're going to unfold. I think it's safe to say that there's going to be some reduction. It would be wise to make some adjustment now. We heard the same type of thing from the Essex FinCom tonight. Expect some type of reduction. So this allows us to make some progress, but not to go so far to the right on those column options that we start cutting well ahead of news that is really kind of uncertain. If that news starts to come and we have to deal with it, I think we've shown that we have a plan of how to get there. But I think this allows us to say what our preferred option is, and it explains also why, in the current environment where everybody is experiencing some pain, we're not reducing assessments. It's because we're absorbing some spending cuts that are going to be painful, and also absorbing the risk of E&D funds going up. So that's basically what I was hoping to show. Any questions? Happy to take them.
Avi, thank you for breaking this out. I will say that this option that we're discussing is supported by the towns. This is a budget that the towns will get behind and will support. So I think that's important as we go to town meeting floor. It's important to know that, because the risk is, if we don't have a supported budget, you see where we go, all the way to the right on that last column, and then so sounds like you have something to ask.
Hi, I do. Pam and Avi, are you recommending the first column and not the second column yet? Because I could consider the second column.
I'm with Annie on that, just for the record. I'm not quite as optimistic, and I think we should consider the second column.
But we can always cut down. If we cut too low, we can't go back up, right?
Right, and that's why I asked if Pam and Avi think it's better to just.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just asking for their guidance. That's all.
Right, and I'd like to hear that as well. Thanks.
I guess it's really a school committee question, because it's about how you want to plan for the use of reserves. Once you move to the 420 column and so when we did our override a few years back, we purposefully funded small cap annually. That's facilities investments, things like needing to refurbish a classroom, needing to do some flooring, needing to do some maintenance work on a particular aspect of one of the facilities. That's where we pull those monies from. So we started with $100,000 annual allocation when we did our budget override several years back. We cut it back to 60 when we started to get into some shortfalls, and we're trying to work with the towns to meet certain budget goals. And now we're pulling it out all together. So it's a different way of using reserves. And just note, I'm fine going to 420 if that's the will of the group. I just want to make sure what we're basically doing is indirectly adding another 60,000 to reserve usage and creating an optical going forward in terms of rebalancing our budget. But these are difficult times, and I much prefer to do that than cut the program.
So the one thing I want to say about that is Pam and I have both touched on it. The further right we go, the less flexibility we have to be able to address whatever comes down the road. And I feel like we don't know enough to go beyond, I feel, column 2. Again, This is a committee, we're all voting together, but I feel very strongly that we stay in column 1. That gives us the flexibility to move forward if we need to in the future. We can't go backwards.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that we accept column 1 reductions for the fiscal 21 budget.
Thank you, Annie. Do I have a second?
I second. Well,
Okay, there's Weld. Let's take a quick roll call. Eric, are you in
Aye.
favor?
Yes.
Okay, Annie made the motion. Rachel, are you in favor?
Can I just clarify the motion? Sorry.
Yes.
From a legal standpoint, can we also just reference the total spending number on the other slide that Pam had showed? Yeah, the 26,815,714.
So I am the motion to read the column 2 of 26,815,714. And Caroline, you're seconding that?
yes.
Okay, so Eric, you're still in favor?
Yes.
Rachel, you're still in favor?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ken, are you in favor? Ken? Sarah?
This is
Yes.
Ken, I'm in favor.
Okay, great. It sounds like everyone's in favor, no abstentions, no rejections, and the motion carries. Thank you, everyone, and I think the towns will be very, very happy that we were able to come to a decision tonight, because as everybody's working in an environment with not a lot of knowledge, at least this is a data point that we can all move forward with. So thank you, everyone, for coming together on this, and thank you, Pam and Avi, for laying it out so understandably for us. Yeah.
Shannon?
Yes.
We have a request for clarification from Eli Bowling.
Yeah. Okay, Eli, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see the chat.
No problem. So just to reiterate my understanding is, so the choice on the budget that you've made is to make reductions in anticipation of reduction in state aid to the district. Is that correct?
Correct. That $360,000 represents about 10% of our annual state aid. So that's where we're going tonight.
Thank you.
Sure. And thank you.
Before we leave this discussion, Shannon, I know that we talked about penciling in some additional meetings in order to be able to respond if there's some changes. Do we want to? I just want to forget that. I don't know. We don't need to necessarily talk about it now, but I want to make sure that we have agreement on that.
Yes, I was going to bring that up when we talk about planning scenarios and timeline under continued business, because yes, I do think we need to be very flexible this summer to be able to meet as this information comes out. So I think as we're, kind of moving ahead, we'll discuss that. Thank you for bringing it up. So now that we have address that, and I thank everybody for making these very difficult decisions, and there will probably be more to come. So this is not an enviable position, but I thank Pam and Avi for their hard work, and for everyone, coming together. I know we've had conversations over the last couple of days. So do we want to move ahead and under continued business, Pam, and go to fiscal 20 budget? What do we need to address there? Or was that part of this, what we've already discussed?
I think we talked about it. It was more the context of potential operational savings this year and how it's going to really support our reserves.
Okay, so
that was part of revenue assumptions, planning scenarios, and timeline. So school choice. So kind of following along with the level of uncertainty that we have, and one of our I think when we get out into column 3 and 4, the $1 million benchmark and the $665,000 benchmark, I would recommend at this point that we hold on school choice, potentially forego it this year, but save your decision making until August 1st. And then at that point, if we have the capacity to take students, meaning we're not cutting classrooms, then we could look to bring in the siblings who are on the list as a way of trying to continue the school choice program. I feel like I'm not in a position right now to say it's a safe bet. Originally, we were going to be looking at placing students at the elementary level, and those are precisely the areas where we'll potentially lose classrooms in the 2 out columns. So if we have the potential of losing classrooms and collapsing sections, we're going to reduce our capacity to have additional students. Another thought that's crossed my mind in calculating my recommendation is the economy tends to have an impact on people's decisions around private school. So we don't know 2 other things, resident enrollment and potential return from private school and what that may do to our enrollment. So those are kind of some data points that I would consider. Not certain on our actual capacity, not certain if we're going to have an influx of resident students due to the economy, not certain of what our economics are going to be in the summer. And then I look at the program piece. If we're in remote learning or some type of on and off, it's a very difficult situation to onboard a brand new student to the school when they may never have met anybody. So thinking about onboarding a student from another community when they're going to meet their teacher through a computer for the first time doesn't seem like the best pedagogy. So kind of taking it all together, I would say I'd hate to shut the door on it completely, but at this point, I can't recommend going forward with it.
So would August give, well, I guess if it's a sibling, it would give them enough time. If we were to say yes, it's since
it's like a late decision. If people are interested and want to come, they will come. If not, and there's no guarantee either that when we take students now that they actually materialize in the fall. We've seen that in the past. So kind of it's out there for discussion and as much looking for feedback as I am giving you my recommendation.
Okay. Do you need a vote on this too, or just a discussion?
I think we can just discuss it.
Okay. Does anybody want to make a comment, ask a question?
Sure, there's a revenue piece to school choice. So if we don't do school choice, then we're going to have to account for that revenue. Okay, I know.
Yep. Yes.
Preaching to the choir. Okay.
At the end of the day, it's still about doing what's right for the student.
Okay.
Ken, you broke up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. I was saying at the end of the day, it's still about what's doing right for the student. And I agree with Pam that it wouldn't necessarily serve the student's interest well.
Agreed.
I think our original look even had K as a high level recipient of students, and I couldn't think of a more difficult situation than a K student starting in a remote learning model with kids and teachers and principals that they don't know. I don't think that's good for the students.
But any kid who starts in kindergarten is doing that.
Well, I think there's a whole set. I think there's a whole separate discussion about how you engage kindergarten and how you start kindergarten if we're in remote learning. So stay tuned for that.
I would ask, would we want to give parents and caregivers the option to make that decision? I agree with what you're saying, but I'm just wondering if we want to, rather than close the door, just say, this isn't, unless we want to make I'm just putting that out there.
Sure.
I think if that was the only issue, it would be one thing, but I think given that we might have to be reducing our teachers and having bigger classes, then we might not have space, and then we're really stuck if we have too many kids and not enough classroom space.
Agreed. And I think the added possibility, Pam alluded to it a moment ago, the added possibility of, we're kind of hearing on the news that people are trying to escape the cities. Well, we've got a lovely couple of towns here with a great school system, and houses are moving, and there's a new school being built. So I think Manchester and Essex start to look pretty attractive in that light for those who have the ability. So I have no problem with going along with Pam's recommendation. I think it makes sense. Again, flexibility. So if anybody is opposed to it or anybody doesn't agree with it, we go that route and look at it that way. If there's anybody who's, has concerns about it, let's hear from you. Okay. It sounds like the will of the committee is to wait until August to kind of reassess then. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Rachel. So talking about future meetings, we want to plot out some future meetings. It might make some sense. We're all here rather than, guys, can everybody mute, please? This is making me crazy, all this feedback. So does that sound like a plan? Maybe we should block out some time for future meetings because it sounds like we're going to need them. Does that make sense to do now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. While we're all sitting here with calendars in front of us rather than the emails going back and forth. So Pam, would you suggest the bi-weekly meetings? I mean, it doesn't sound like we need a meeting next week because we've had the budget discussion and we've come to a conclusion on that for at least now. And I don't think a ton is going to change in the next week where we might.
I don't either. We may want to just pencil in maybe Thursday night in case something happens between now and then, like an if needed. But we are right back at our typical schedule. We have a meeting scheduled for the 2nd of June. Then there's a building committee meeting the following week. If we had an emergency need, we could always have an early meeting ahead of that. If we needed some type of, if we had to make a very fast budget decision, we could certainly build a meeting in on any Tuesday afternoon. And then we're back together on June 16th, which on my calendar says original last day of school when things were normal. And then we have the 23rd is open and we could just keep that in reserve in case we needed another meeting. But okay. To your point, I mean, we could try to do, I can sketch out a calendar for the summer. I don't know if our typical first and thirds work through July with the holiday schedule. Well, I guess it would be the 30th, and then we would be looking at July 7th for a potential meeting.
And Pam, can you just remind me when the town meetings are?
Yeah. Yep, town meetings are
15th
June 22nd.
That's June 22nd is Essex?
I believe that's Manchester. And Essex, originally they were talking 15th, but I think they moved it to the 13th, which is a Saturday.
Okay.
Oh, really? Okay, 13th.
Do I have that right, Essex people?
I thought it was still on, I was showing still on the 15th, so the 13th is news to me.
Okay.
Annie, do you know anything else?
My understanding is that there is Ruth Perrine is saying by text, Saturday, June 13th at 10 a.m. outside.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Bring coolers. Oh, did I say that out loud?
Yeah, no.
And when are the election days?
We're not having elections.
Essex is on the 22nd.
The 22nd.
And it's the 30th for Manchester.
Okay.
So that means that you'll have to come to meetings still.
Very, very happy about that.
You're not rid of us yet, Caroline.
No, I'm serious.
We're not kicking you out of the nest just yet.
And Rachel.
That's right. And Rachel. It's too bad we're virtual. We can't have anyway, which we couldn't do legally anyway. I was just kidding.
I am happy to sketch out confirm dates and kind of pencil in dates in case they're needed and circulate that to everybody.
Yeah, let's do that because I think it would be a good idea to be prepared and have those so that we can tee them up if we need them because we may need them. All right, so getting to the end, we wrapped this up pretty quickly. Thank you, everyone. School committee comment. Does anyone want to say anything?
Can we do public comment first? Because I do want to just talk briefly at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to open it up to public comment, and because we're in a virtual world, I would appreciate it if you had a public comment not to put the comment in the chat, rather your name and your address, and then we can go through it that way. And again, to remind you, this is a comment format and not a Q&A and not a back and forth discussion. So with that, let it rip. Okay. I believe there is August. Is August out there? I think Jake is suggesting that August go before he does.
August is here.
Hi, August. Thank you for staying up with us.
Hi. He's in his jammies. We're ready for bed.
Jammies too. Thank you for coming to see us. Go ahead, August.
I'm just going to hold on one second, honey. I just wanted to let you know how this came about. August spoke to you guys back in January. He read you his letter. And he hopped on a Zoom meeting with his wonderful teacher this morning who always checks in on feelings. And August was having some big feelings about the playground. And so she suggested that if he was having some big feelings, the best way to deal with those feelings is to maybe write a letter to the school committee and tell them about them. So he has done that.
Dear school committee, I was disappointed when you said the playground got canceled. I am 6. I can't sit around for 2 years not having a playground. I need to slide, swing, and climb. I need to get my energy out. From August Koch.
August, thank you very much. I think we all have some big feelings about the playground, and we're all going to cross our fingers and hope that things happen sooner than we think. So I really appreciate you coming and reading us your letter, and keep doing that when you have big feelings. Put them in paper. Put them on paper. That's a good idea. It makes you feel a little bit better. So thank you. We'll keep our fingers crossed that we get back to normal soon, and we can all swing and slide and play too. So thank you. And go to bed for your mom, okay?
Yeah.
Thanks, Kate. I know, sorry, I just muted myself. I know that Jake also wanted to speak.
Yeah, thank you all. And thank you, August. Appreciate that. So I actually wrote this on the assumption that public comment was up front, and I'm going to go ahead and read it as I wrote it because a few others have written it, have read it and commented in response to it just this afternoon. And so it's really written to inform the school committee discussion, which didn't turn out to be a discussion. I didn't realize it was a decision made outside of the public meeting. So I'll read it and then I'll make a few contemporaneous comments based on how the discussion went today. So reading. This statement is my own, not on behalf of the Essex Playground Working Group. However, a few parents with association to the working group, including Jess Urwitz, and from the Essex PTO have weighed in with similar thoughts of support. So this is not provided completely in isolation. My understanding is that you will take action tonight to put the Essex Elementary Playground replacement on hold for 6 to 9 months. Given the budgetary context we currently find ourselves in, with the uncertainty it brings for programming and fall planning, I understand this need. I am hopeful that you will view this as a simple delay in the process to allow the districts and yourselves the opportunity to focus on next steps planning. I strongly hope that this is not a delay that may result in later cuts or reductions to the playground next year. I fully understand and support the need to provide district staff and school committee the time to focus on planning. In fact, I would like to contribute to that planning if at all possible, such that any future remote learning opportunity will be an engaging and productive experience, and to help make the most of whatever modified structures need to be put into place for a safe return to the buildings. It is imperative that students view that return, in whatever form it takes, as an engaging, social, and interactive experience, as school should be. If, however, this is an action that is being taken out of a primary concern for the budget, and with the option to cut or reduce the playground in the future, then I would ask you to reconsider your planned action. We have already talked about some of the concerns and impacts of a reduction in the playground. On the budgetary side, a delay will likely increase costs. We might be able to negotiate with Compan on keeping the costs of the structures at the same amount, but Compan does not have as much say in the installation costs, particularly the poured-in-place surfacing, which is almost half the cost. A delay with the potential of a future cut will also substantially impact the momentum and goodwill in the replacement process. This is a substantive decision that will be taken without much of any input from the public. As a recap, this process started when the district closed the Eagle's Nest for safety purposes this winter. The school committee then asked if it was possible to have a replacement playground in place for the fall. Jess Urwitz and I, with the support of the Essex PTO, held a public session to determine if a relatively short process would be sufficient to allow for enough public input to inform the design. The consensus was that it was possible. While some of that envisioned public input was not accomplished due to the virus outbreak, we did gather substantive input from different groups, including students and the public via a survey, that has informed the current design. The relatively short process also meant that we had to work within a state procurement process that limited the options for vendors, but we found a company with equipment and expertise to design the playground everyone is excited about. A delay in this process is likely palatable, but only if you make it clear that the process will pick up from where it currently is. Finally, if this action is taken primarily from a budgetary perspective, with the option for reducing the playground in the future, it multiplies the perspective that Essex Elementary is the only school to be taking a hit in this process, while Memorial continues on without any impact. If capital expenditures are being frozen, please apply the same equity lens that has been so prevalent in regards to building and designing the playground. I appreciate the support the school committee has expressed for this playground design so far, including at your last meeting where you all rejected a reduction option. I hope that in delaying the project to focus on planning, you will reaffirm your support for the playground as proposed when the process restarts. If, however, the delay is primarily motivated by budget concerns, I would strongly encourage you to reconsider your planned action. From a budgetary perspective, a delay will only increase costs or lead to a reduction in the playground structure. So that's the end of the statement I prepared. So a few comments based on what I heard today. The conversation today is clearly centered in the budget context. I'm a little confused as to why there's no discussion about capital projects. There, the 60,000 seems like a pretty minor nod to that in the scenarios we've seen tonight. There's no mention of Memorial impacts at all. And being on the building committee for Memorial, I know that the conversation in that context is actually the opposite. It's going along quite well without any need for considering cuts to what's currently planned. So from a budget perspective, it seems like a pretty confusing reason for the delay from what I'm hearing so far. And I understand that may change as time goes on, and I appreciate that you want to keep your options open. But beyond the equity issue, my concern with the Essex playground really is that as we get into next year, if budgets are as bad as maybe in some scenarios, that we end up delaying it again and or just throwing something cheap up just to have something. And with each further delay, replacement of this playground gets more expensive, and we get closer to saying why even replace it when there's the potential for a process to replace the whole school that gets closer with each year that passes. So I share that with you. Clearly, you've made a decision here already, and so I'm not sure where you want to take that, but just so you know where I and some others stand on that. A few other comments separate from the playground that to reflect on your conversations today. One, in terms of planning for the fall, I think it's going to be very important to consider what parents are going to be faced with a decision about sending their kid back to school. Many may, or some at least, may choose to stay out of school if there is no testing for the virus or vaccine for the virus. and what are the implications for a student or a family who chooses not to send a kid back into a building, even if it's open.
Jake, I think we're going to have to wrap things up because I think there's some other people that want to speak. I do appreciate your comments and thank you for coming to make them. You know, as I said, we're not going to do a back and forth, and it's not going to be a Q&A, but I know Annie does want to speak at the very end of public comment. So I just wanted to give other people some time.
Can I just say one other thing about parent involvement?
Sure.
I don't think I'm alone in wanting to help think through the planning, and parent voice in this planning process will be very important. So please, if you would consider that in that effort.
Agreed. Thank you. Kate. So I would remind you just to keep your remarks under 2 minutes, if you would please.
I will try.
Thank you.
I just want to agree with Jake. I have two main points. One, I do think that there's an equity issue that hasn't been addressed. Manchester did request the $235,000 cut to the district budget, and that impacts spending in both towns. Essex extended themselves to fund the elementary school, and it is a little bit of a blow that the cost of their cut is effectively the cost of our playground. And then I also wanted to briefly talk about the excuse me, honey, the term, you know, that we don't want to cut the program. And I think that kind of overlooks the fact that play and exercise are not luxuries in an elementary school program. Those are imperative to an elementary school program, and the types of sensory motor input that kids receive from playing on a play structure cannot be replicated on the hot top. Those are actually part of their program. And then beyond that, I know that we have all had conversations in our homes, conversations with our teachers, I'm sure conversations within the school committee about prioritizing mental health. And I really think that this playground is going to be mental health for a lot of kids in Essex. And so it would be a real shame to see that delayed even more than it already has been. And I think it sends a message to kids about where the priorities are. I just wanted to say that I think that's unfortunate.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciate it. I don't see anybody else coming up on the chat. Annie, would you like to make your remarks?
Actually, can I just have a comment? This is Christine Reisfelder.
I'm sorry. Can you put your name and your address in the chat?
Oh, sorry.
Record of who you are.
I'm on the phone.
Okay. What's your name?
Christine Reisfelder.
Christine, are you in Manchester or Essex?
I'm in Manchester.
Okay. We're just having you repeat your name for the record. You know.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, Christine, go ahead. We'd love to hear your comment. If you could keep it under 2 minutes, that would be much
Yes, it's only comments. So my kids are actually thriving. They're doing fine. And personally, I think it's pretty weary of them returning in the fall. And so my only comment was I was thinking maybe we could poll the parents and see like which kids are doing fine, which kids aren't. And for those of us who are doing fine, let them continue with remote learning and maybe ease the burden of the school district for the families that are struggling.
Agreed.
And that's
yeah. I think Kate, unfortunately, a lot of this is going to be dictated by the state. So.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. I'm more saying I think that there are some families that are actually doing A-OK. Okay. And if they're doing A-OK, then they're doing A-OK. And the ones that aren't, maybe we focus on figuring out how to make it work for them.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's an interesting idea. Thank you. Appreciate it. Was there anyone else who had any comments? Sounds like no. Annie, would you like to go ahead and speak?
Yeah, I just I have heard some criticism from parents about what's happening, and there's been some questions about teachers, and I actually ran into a few of them in my walks and asked them to kind of compile some remarks about like what's different for you, what does your day look like, and I was surprised at what I had heard. And I don't know if necessarily it's appropriate for me to have that conversation now, but I would love for parents to understand kind of what's different in the day for teachers, so that parents have a better understanding of kind of the challenges that teachers are confronting in delivering education right now. I know that they're not, while there are a lot of parents who are engaged, there are some students who have not engaged at all. And there's a whole process for teachers to work with families to get them re-engaged. And I was unaware of how much one-to-one work was being done with students and families on the teacher's part. And so I just, I think in the next meeting, it would be helpful for school committee to have a conversation about what has this been looking like, and so that teachers, we get a little more insight into what teachers are dealing with day to day, because there were some great positives about more engagement with families, but there's also a lot of challenges and a lot of time spent in trying to revise lesson plans and get teachers and families aligned on expectations. So that's all I wanted to say, and I do think it's important for us to understand where teachers are coming from, especially as we move into the fall.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be really helpful for everyone to hear. I don't know in what format we would do it, but I think that's an interesting point. I'm glad you brought it up, because that's, we're in unprecedented times. Gotta hate that word now. We're in very difficult times, and I think it's helpful to think kind of, outside yourself and what your own experience is, especially when you're engaging, like, a teacher and a student. What is it like on the other side of that screen? So thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you ran into the teachers on your walks. So if there is nothing else, I am going to ask for a motion to adjourn. You guys all want to stay here tonight? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Well moves.
Second.
Caroline, that's you. Annie seconds. All in favor? I'm going to assume yes. Everyone, aye?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you very much, everyone. Stay well.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you all for tuning in to see us tonight. We are adjourned.